Hi, I'm Doug Crawford. I'm the curator of a vintage computer museum in Wall Township, New Jersey. One of the best secrets in the tri-state area of a place to go to see all kinds of really interesting historical technology items. So our computer museum is here, and you're looking down the aisle of our early 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s computers. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we have in this museum, and we hope that you come visit us to experience it for yourself. One of the first things you'll see in our museum is a display on the ENIAC. Now, a lot of people think that computing is all on the West Coast development, but in the 1940s, it was Philadelphia, and they developed this computer for military purposes, and we'll tell you all about this on your visit to the museum. Another piece in our museum is this very unique Bendix G15 model, and it came about 10 years after the ENIAC, and it was used locally for civil engineering projects. And we'll tell you all about what's inside of this machine, a little bit about how it works if you're interested. One of the things we really are trying to focus on uniquely in this museum is the science, technology, engineering, and math aspects. So if you have a student, or if you have a nephew, or you have a relative that is interested in science and technology, we want to help these folks understand technology from a historical standpoint. So this case here that we've set up, it shows how the electronics inside computers have transitioned from the early days to today, how they went from room-sized computers down to being able to be put in your pocket. And we can go into several levels of detail about this from an engineering perspective if you, the visitor, cares to know. So, most of the museum contains digital computers, but we also cover analog computers. Now, these were a competing technology back in the mid-50s. This computer comes from MIT and was used by a very famous instructor to teach how to model mathematical systems using signals. So anyway, we can tell you all about this and how this competed with the digital technologies of the day and what it brought to the table and why it isn't, in fact, the kind of computer we use today. So in some cases, most cases, we have whole computers here, but in some cases we have pieces of very rare artifacts, like from the early days of the Eckert and Mauchly Computer Company in Philadelphia, who kicked off commercial computing completely. Early works from Burroughs when they transitioned from their calculating mechanical machines to electronic digital computers, and even pieces of very rare artifacts from the early computer defense systems from the military. We are very pleased to bring this kind of an exhibit to the public. This here is the first Navy guided missile control system computer from the mid-1960s. If you come and look at this, we'll tell you about how this controlled guided missiles in the early days of computer-controlled defense systems. Here we have a business computer from the same era as the guided missile system that you just saw before. So the guided missile system was what the military was doing with computers. This is what IBM was doing with small business computers. And when you come and see this, you'll be able to punch a card, create an input that would be used by the computer. And we'll talk about how this worked, because it's very interesting how difficult it was to operate computers back in these days. We'll talk about the user interfaces. We'll talk about how the computer loaded. And I wanted to mention that this machine will be restored to operating condition probably this year. And like many of the other computers in this museum, you'll be able to get demonstrations of these computers and how they worked, and in some cases be able to operate them yourself. All right, so coming from those computers that you just saw, next thing you'll see if you come here is our mini computer displays. We have some rare and interesting mini computers that followed on after the older big computers, and they use the latest innovations. So here is a Digital Equipment Corporation mini computer, and well, I'm going to turn this on for you. I mentioned that we will do demonstrations, so I'm going to show you that we're going to do one here. So I'm going to turn on this machine, and it has a program loaded inside that I'm going to start up. And what this is doing, it's a simple little program that just sweeps the light across the screen here. But this is showing that a piece of software that we wanted to run is actually running on this machine. We have various demonstration programs on various computers, some that will print out information and print out souvenir tapes. And these mini computers, we'll talk about them and tell you about how these innovated from the computers that came before, and make clear how the innovations in the electronics have contributed to the shrinking of the computers, the bringing down of the cost of the computers, and more companies being able to employ computers in their everyday work. So, the story continues in our museum from those mini computers to microcomputers. And we like to tell the story here of how the innovation of the microprocessor led to the next decade's innovations. And what we have on display that we can tell you all about are some of the earliest microprocessors that were produced and what they were used in, the boards that you could buy them on and learn how microprocessors worked, and engineers and hobbyists alike would use these to learn to program. Following onto that, the whole spectrum of the microcomputers that followed on using the low-cost microprocessors as the foundation for the computer inside. We'd love to tell you all about how the PC really got started and the early machines that brought computing to your desktop, including the people that innovated and brought us the software and the hardware that made all of this computing technology possible. Our tour generally concludes with some things that are very familiar today and how those things came about, including the World Wide Web, which was developed on a machine just like this, a Next Cube computer, and our familiar movies, Jurassic Park and Toy Story type movies, being created on an Indigo Silicon Graphics computer like this one here. But the story of the computers and the technology isn't all we have to offer as an experience here. When you come to our museum, you can use these machines, you can experiment with them, you can play games on them, you can get demonstrations on them. This is not a behind glass museum. As you saw, everything's out in the open. And we invite everyone to touch the computers, type on them. You can learn to program in BASIC on these. So we are a hands-on museum and a learning center.
Hi, I'm Bart Hurst, and I'm a Dawson here at the museum. And I'm here with Doug, and I'm going to ask him a few questions about his background in the museum. So, hey, Doug.
How you doing?
Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved with the museum?
Sure can. So I'm from the local area, and I had a career that put me in the midst of many of the things that are talked about in this museum, from microprocessors to software engineering to database and computer use. And so I lived through a good bit of the history that's represented in this museum. And this museum came about from the work of a lot of hobbyists who accumulated these artifacts, and we basically put them on display a long time ago. And now, with my involvement, we're trying to make sense out of the history of it and try to pull together a historical experience about what it meant to have these machines in these different eras come to bear on our life.
Now, you've been making a lot of updates and improvements to the museum. Could you tell me a little bit about those?
Yeah, so starting from a very fine collection of things on display, what it has meant to try to interpret all of this equipment and make an interesting tour out of is to research how these machines were used specifically, who built them, what their effect was on society, and to bring that out in some degree of either presentation or signage. So it's basically turned into a revamping of the whole museum to make it more educational, to make it more interesting, to be able to talk about a lot of different subjects that are actually touched upon in every era of this computer, from how user interfaces evolved to how programming languages evolved as the hardware got better and better, how data communications evolved from almost nothing to the World Wide Web today. So we endeavor to bring all that to the surface for the experience when you visit this museum.
That's awesome, and that's a good segue to the mission statement. Could you tell me a little bit about the mission statement of InfoAge and VCF and the museum? Yeah.
Okay, so our museum being part of this larger InfoAge campus, which is one of the most amazing and best kept secrets on the East Coast of technology museum experience, we're a partner with InfoAge. And InfoAge has had a mission statement of serving the community and it's the folks that are being developed to study technology, like STEM students. That their mission is to reach out to them and provide them technical, historical experiences. For instance, our radio museum that's on campus has a vast and beautiful exhibit of radio artifacts from the beginning of radio, which in fact was the beginning of this whole campus. It began as Marconi's development of commercial radio happened here on this campus. So the radio museum is awesome. It caters to learning about radio. Our museum is now catering to learning about computing. So our mission is now aligning with InfoAge's mission of supporting STEM education. And that's the fundamental change I think that we've had to absorb from just presenting our cool computers to actually teaching some subjects about computers, or not necessarily teaching, but fostering the education or the interest, or inspiring kids to understand more about how computers work.
Excellent. And with that in mind, what are the future plans for the museum and the growth targets going forward to move towards STEM and education?
So we plan to grow. We have a modest size space here that we make a lot of good use of, and we have awesome artifacts here. We have plans to move into a space that's probably 6 times the space here. So come see us while we're here at this space, because it's going to be a unique experience that'll change when we move to a bigger space. But you can help us get to our bigger space by coming to this museum and donating to us and InfoAge to be able to keep progressing. We have a whole warehouse full of more computer artifacts that we can bring to bear in a bigger space. We have lots more stories we can tell. It's going to be, our plans are pretty awesome to bring an amazing experience that might be world class to New Jersey.